Lenin made the point before the Russian Revolution that the real question, the only question, the main question asked is whether or not we shoot the Tsar. The answer to that question ended up being yes. The reason I'm bringing this up, and an interesting thing to note here, is that Lenin, despite of his ambitions in Russia and wanting to change Russia, meaning the revolution, he was supported by the Germans. If you remember, in World War I, Lenin was dropped into Russia like a bomb. He stopped writing his book because the Russian Revolution at that point had started to kick off. The most interesting part to this, though, is that he was funded by the Germans. And once he got into office, what did he do? He gave Germany a massive amount of land. His reasoning politically made sense. I mean, A, we can't necessarily fight them at this point, and B, also, probably behind the scenes, it was agreed upon. It was also understood, though, that if Germany loses the war, they're going to get the land back anyway. And once they consolidate their power, they're going to try to get the land back anyway. That kind of goes to a side point or tangent. The interesting and the main point here that I want to get across that many people don't necessarily know or don't necessarily pay attention to is that he was funded by the Russians. Governments fund projects into their competitors' countries. It could be for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes it's to destabilize the country. Sometimes it's to make the other country look bad. Sometimes it's for political purposes in order to kind of create a balance of power of sort. You support the side that you back. I'm going to point this out because I want to talk about China. And I want to talk about Hong Kong. I want to talk about a picture that hit the media that China has expressed, quote unquote, deep dissatisfaction with, dealing with the United States interacting with the fires and the protests that have been taking place in Hong Kong. And an evolution of those protests, like I on this channel has said multiple times, always takes place to being against just a government plan, meaning a policy of sending people over to mainland China, but also to this notion of just independence in and of itself. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, you find yourself coming back often, please like, please share, please subscribe. And if you definitely dig it, please consider supporting through PayPal or Patreon. YouTube is an untrustworthy actor, so at this point, this content is brought to you by you. And I always say I appreciate you allowing me to do it. Take a look at this. This is the police station in Hong Kong on fire. The protests in Hong Kong have taken on an aggressive tint. Right now, Hong Kong has regional authority. They go by this notion of two systems, even though it's one country, meaning Hong Kong technically is under the auspices of China. And if you remember, Hong Kong was given back to China, let's say it that way, was given back to China because there's all sorts of history that go along with Western domination of China and even into internal dynamics of cultural dynamics of how China feels about that period in their past where they weren't able to maintain their sovereignty, their integrity, because Western powers were too strong in this process, where they were forced to deal with the opium trade. All sorts of things that we don't necessarily pay attention to, but drives deep within their cultural bases. As deep as race does in this country. We don't pay attention. My point is this. Despite all of that, Hong Kong, at this point, is a separate and distinct thing unto itself. And taking out right, wrong, all this other stuff, just the very basis of them feeling their own independence, to some degree they're pushing for this notion. You have forces in Hong Kong pushing against this notion of being under the rule or under the thumb of China. However, China is looking at this as, you're part of us. You should have never been taken for us at all. And all of these protests that are taking place are national embarrassment, because every protest that takes place gets across that we weren't able to maintain our sovereignty at one point. And that this, to some degree, is a defying of the one rule order. Hong Kong is supposed to be handed back over to China in full 50 years from the date of the original handover. I think it was 97. So what, 2047, I believe? That doesn't look like that's going well. That doesn't look like that's going well. The most modest step creates this. Now, the Chinese government released this footage, this video. They released this video, and they included the subtitles. You may not know this, but I could do all that. That's scaling the wall. I could do that. I could do that. I could do that. I can do that without that pole. I'm athletic like that. You can't tell it with me sitting behind this desk, but my wife will vouch for my athletic abilities. My point is, they released that video. That was the military releasing that video. That video was directly aimed at this. Directly aimed at this. Directly aimed at scenes like the indignity of having the police station, the thing that's supposed to have law and order, set on fire, a complete show of chaos and disorder. This video was aimed at the protesters. These are drills by the Chinese military talking about invading mainland Hong Kong in order to put down rest and taking over, I would imagine, a certain degree of direct control over Hong Kong. Now, what are they using to justify this? Because the fact of the matter is, Hong Kong should be able to deal with the affairs of Hong Kong, right? What they're justifying this is saying, look, all of these protests are not necessarily purely from the people of Hong Kong. There may be people in Hong Kong who want a pro-democracy, fair enough, but all of these protests, the riots, the setting things on fire, this is not entirely from just homegrown. They're arguing that the United States is working in coordination to push this and spur this on, especially to get to a certain degree of violence. Here's another note. The protesters have now evolved their demands just from that particular list that they were saying, this notion of sending people to mainland China, to independence. To independence. Now, the issue for China, and to back up China's point, is this picture that was released in media. Chinese media. That woman works with the U.S. State Department, or works with the United States government. Let's say it that way. Let's be specific. They show her working with the group, the pro-democracy group in Hong Kong, that is responsible in large part for organizing these protests. If I can get that video back. Meaning, pro-democracy group that's pushing these protests. And don't misunderstand me, it's not just the group. Clearly, it's not 5 people responsible for all these people. Clearly, these people have some feelings about the process, so don't misunderstand me. But the leaders of the organization pushing this is meeting with someone from the United States. HK Independence Organization met with Julie Edith of U.S. Consulate General in Hong Kong. She is a subversion expert at the State Department. The Chinese people are not afraid of evil, nor are they afraid of causing trouble. Their argument is, look, these protests are not entirely of their own making. And evidence of such, the signs are in English. That's not necessarily evidence of such. Many people in Hong Kong speak English. They were part of Britain at one point, so that makes sense. Kenya is the same way. It was under the British thumb. Many of them, pretty much all of them, speak English. I would imagine the same thing is true in Hong Kong. So there's that. Also, they want to push this towards a Western audience because in their mind, Britain threw us away. It's weird politics here, right? I mean, because technically Hong Kong was China's. Britain did take it away almost in retaliation for one of the rebellions, or the rebellions. And the giving it back. But the problem is, the moment that you take it, it's something separate. It's something distinct. It becomes its own thing. So notion of giving it back doesn't entirely make sense. How can you give something back that at this point is something on its own thing? And once again, another fire around the world that's caused by the Brits, entirely caused by the Brits. I am one of those people that believe in independence. If a group of people have come together to a certain degree and they have their own thing, then they are their own thing. And they can make the choice on their own self-determination. Now, China is not going to accept that because this is a natural disgrace for them. Seeing the United States engaged in something that they consider to be internal politics for their own is problematic for them. However, the kids or the people who are involved in the pro-democracy forces are, of course, just like Lenin, going to look out for support outside of the country. And by the way, that's always happened. You can go back to the United States wars with Britain. France was helping the United States in its war with Britain. Why? Because France wanted to stick a knife in Britain, and they were going to use the United States to do so. Well, you have the same thing here in China. Now, the difference here is we look at this and be like, this problem is bad enough and complicated enough for us to get involved in the process. The catch here is whether it always boils down to the results, not necessarily good or bad. Reality of it is, this is what states do. Whether I like it or not, it's what states do. The catch here is the consequences. Consequences matter. China is saying the United States is involving itself into the affairs of Hong Kong and are causing disorder. Because they are causing disorder, this gives us just cause to send in our military, if necessary, to bring things in line to allow Hong Kong to function again. Because again, technically, Hong Kong is under our jurisdiction. The United States instigation here is being used as a pretext to potentially take more direct control over Hong Kong. From the United States standpoint, it doesn't care one way or the other. If China does that, it looks horrendous in the sense of international community that will have an outcry of the injuries and the killings that will undoubtedly take place if that takes place. Meaning if they send military on mainland, all hell will break loose. On the second point, if they don't do it, it still allows them to instigate these matters, which is also somewhat of a national disgrace for China. It is a win-win in either scenario because ultimately the United States doesn't necessarily care all that much about Hong Kong, just in the overwhelming politics of it. We don't have a tether there other than to screw with China. I hope you understand my point. It's the same reason why we're sending weapons to Taiwan. Some of this is to put a curb on the influence and the strength of China. Part of that is also to find means of doing that is somewhat asymmetrical, that is not one-to-one, and having these proxy conflicts. Even though these things are not necessarily all-out wars, the question is, how much does the United States invest itself into securing the independence of Hong Kong? I would imagine not much. It would be obscene for the U.S. to get involved militarily over Hong Kong. We have no tether, no link, no nothing to Hong Kong. So that would be weird. But proxy conflicts, from the U.S. standpoint, makes all the sense in the world. It's a win-win. If an independence movement breaks out in Hong Kong, that rips itself or tries to rip itself away from China, and China tries direct control over that, that is going to be problematic for the view of China, meaning the world is going to look at that with a certain degree of problem. I hope you understand what I mean. It's an optics issue. It looks bad when you're out there killing a lot of people in order to pacify a population. And the world, especially the Western media, is going to look at that in a particular light. China looks at that as that's our territory. If we need to put down order, we need to put down order. Any country would do it. The difference here is it is your territory in a technical sense. And it seems that that territory doesn't want to be your territory. This is fascinating politics. I mean, this is literally historical precedent playing out. I'm trying to refrain from doing good, bad, and moralizing on this because ultimately it's what countries do. It's, if China got the opportunity to do the same thing in the United States, it would take the opportunity to do the same thing in the United States. It's just the opportunity hasn't presented itself. By the same token, the question becomes, what is the results of this in a larger world? Does this create more tension? Yes, it does create more tension. Does China hate this? Yes, they're greatly dissatisfied with this. And they would look at this as a reason to take action. And by the way, whether the United States and how invested the United States has been into doing this is unclear. What I would put to you, though, is that unclarity works to the side of China. I think two things are at work. One, China would rather not that to take place. Two, they would rather not Hong Kong exist in the way that it's existing in the first place. Meaning, this two-system thing is kind of a fudge. It's something that it's like, we don't particularly like this, but there's all sorts of chaos if we try to kind of shift this immediately. Well, the same thing holds true now, right? I mean, if you try to shift it immediately with this kind of direct control, you're going to create all sorts of problems, and you could create a backlash that may not necessarily you be able to predict the outcome of that. Meaning the very act of trying to take control over the situation may make it more likely for you to lose a bit more control in the situation, not to mention the outcry. I don't necessarily think they want to have direct military control of Hong Kong. However, if it comes to that, would they do it? Potentially, yes. Again, from the U.S. standpoint, all of it is gravy. All of it's gravy. I mean, that's cynical, yes. But we have no tether to Hong Kong other than to put a knife or a screw with China. And that works in all scenarios. It works in a scenario of China trying to take direct control over Hong Kong just because of the chaos that's going to erupt, and everybody's going to start pointing their finger at China like, oh my God, I can't believe you're doing this. This is horrendous. Everybody missing the fact that China is saying, look, you're screwing with our internal affairs. Leave us alone. And because you're screwing with us, we now have the ability to get more involved. Whether these kids realize it or not, the U.S. doesn't care about their interests, but the U.S. will use them for our own. Insofar as those interests coincide with one another, you find the sweet spot. Germany didn't care about Lenin and his interests. What they did care about was destabilizing Russia. Insofar as those two things met, they were in a sweet spot. I make the same point here. My only thing with this is it's unclear what happens with this. Would they try to pacify this group? Maybe, yes. They're threatening to do so. They're sending this threat out in advance, meaning this is what we will do if this continues. And yeah, we know that you're working with the U.S. to do so. Thing is, again, we don't know how far that goes. All right, I'm going to end this. I just wanted to give a heads up, man. The thing in Hong Kong is fascinating politics. There's a historical precedent to it and everything else that's kind of just playing its way out. And now you have the secondary element of a trade war and a new element of the U.S. instigating itself into affairs that was dealing with the Brits at one point. It's really weird and interesting, but keep an eye on Hong Kong. It's on fire, and it may just get worse. Thanks so.